Hello, everyone. Welcome to Automation Hour. If you're joining us for the first time, all lines are muted. Please post your questions to the Trailblazer community Salesforce Automation Hour, and we will be posting the link to the recording as well as the deck sometime after the session. We'll also be posting the link on our website, automationhour.com. And if you haven't signed up for our sessions for the rest of the year, we are fully booked out, and Monica is actually coming back in November. So if you can't attend these live, I definitely recommend still registering for them, and then you get notified when they're up and running. I also want to point out October 23rd, where we have our very own co-host Rakesh coming back to present, so don't miss that. And I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io, because without them, we cannot bring this great free webinar series to you. So hopefully you like it and continue to come back and tell your friends. And here are your co-hosts, myself, Rakesh, and David. We hope to see you sometime in the near future when we're able to gather together again. All right, and with that, we're very excited to have Monica come back. She's a fellow MVP, and she's going to share great information with you today. So let me flip it over to Monica. You should have control.
All right. Everything looking right on your end?
It looks good.
Fantastic. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Jen and Rakesh and David, for having me back on Automation Hour. Really thrilling for me. I am Monica Sandberg, as Jen said before. I'm also known in the community as Not As Blank Monica. I'm an InsurTech innovator, architect, and admin, 3 times Salesforce MVP, 4 times Dreamforce speaker, and now 2-time Automation Hour guest. And this format, this show has just been fantastic. I've learned so much from it, and I am just thrilled and honored to be a part of it at this time. Now, I am the first to tell you, I don't have all the answers. I never will have all the answers. But what I do have are lots and lots and lots of questions. So together, we're going to explore and experiment with the newest edition of Flow Builder. It was just released in my org, I think about a week ago. And we're going to talk about the whys and hows of user context and the implications of our choices when we're building and refactoring our existing flows and taking advantage of the new functionalities available in the newest release, especially this one of summer 2020. Please feel free and reach out to me on Twitter at NotAsBlank. That's the best channel to reach out to me. Check out my YouTube channel. Just look up at NotAsBlank. I've been doing some episodes, Meet the MVPs, where you can find out and discuss topics with the Salesforce MVPs. Also, I'm doing a show called Ohana Q&A that will be posted on the YouTube channel. Now, things are changing. We know they are so fast in the Salesforce ecosystem. It's not what you know now. It's how fast can we learn that determines our success. And when you think about it, we have the best solutions. Everything's working perfectly. And guess what? There's a new release that comes out for Salesforce. And that is the time that we really need to think of experimentation and learning and moving forward with the new releases of Salesforce. And in case in point, my Dreamforce 2019 wasn't that long ago. I did a session and we talked about mode of execution, how it relates to automation. And now in less than 1 year, some of this is outdated because now the default mode of execution, we can change it and we can override it. And we can also control user access, which wasn't a thing just a few months ago. And Salesforce is going all in on Flow. And it's really significant changes, and now decisions. So I myself am deciding whether or not to refactor now. And when I get new business requirements, which I have some on my desk right now, how should I build them? How do I do that in the newest way without disrupting the existing solution? So I gotta tell you, hashtag why admins toss and turn all night with insomnia, but that is the reason for this session. So don't get me wrong, super exciting. We're code free, architects, admins, developers. We can do almost anything now, button click, without any code. Once we needed, a lot of developers on our team, but we can do these things now. And we can run flows without worrying about user permissions with system mode. That is just unbelievably exciting. And we can control the user's ability to run individual flows with profiles and permission sets. And we have record triggers for flow and so many things that are game changers. But before we start refactoring and doing these things, we need to understand how this works, because I'm telling you, this could happen. You could have a monumental whoopsie. That's really not what we want. Hashtag why admins drink. We really need to, now more than ever, understand all the implications of our choices when building these flows. And honestly, I know you don't think you're a developer, but you are a developer. You're not writing a single line of code, but we have to make our configuration choices carefully and do really diligent testing before developing our flows. And last time I was here on Automation Hour, I actually introduced my Automation Command Center. And at that time, I was building my own way of getting a bird's eye view of my automation. And I wanted to switch my flows and processes on and off from one place. And my solution at that time was what time changes here. At that time, I was using my custom metadata types. And on my individual flows, I was looking at my running user and turning these flows on and off. Guess what? Now, Salesforce is providing some of this same functionality out of the box. So let's do some experimental demos and see how it works. The first thing we want to look at here is how to control user accessibility to our flows. Now, let's flash back last year. How did I do this last year? Well, I built my custom automation command center, my command center automation, and I used custom metadata types, and I got my record, and then I checked who is my running user, and then I accessed on or off my flows based upon my running user. But now Salesforce has an out-of-the-box option. So let's take a look. I just created a simple screen flow here. And we're going to click Save. Now, I kind of expected that when I created this flow, that this is where I would be controlling who has accessibility to the flow. But that's not the case. It's okay. It's just what I kind of expected. And I'll tell you why they didn't do this in a moment. But from here, there is no way to say who should be able to use this flow. I created a new flow. So in order to to change the access to your flow, we go to our list of flows, our flow view, and then there's a little arrow. We have a sample flow, and there it is, edit access. And the reason Salesforce did that is because we can do this now with all of our flows that were created, I don't know how many years ago. I have some in my org since the beginning of flows wherever with Salesforce. And we can do it now. Now here it is. By default, what Salesforce is telling us here is that by default, the behavior is that if someone can run a flow or manage a flow through a profile, permission set, or the user record, then they have access to this flow. Unless, this is new, really exciting, we can override that and we can restrict the access. Not everyone who can run a flow. This particular flow, we want to say who is allowed to use this flow. And that's how we do it. If we're going to go by profile, we check box the override and we choose which profile that we'd like to be able to use this flow. The sample flow 1, we want to choose who can use it. Now, your guest user profile on your communities, that's exactly how you would use that. That's what you want to do for the guest user, is to do that default. And what's great about this is all of my existing flows, I can change the access. And that's it. Now, one of my issues here is that how do I know who I've given access to in an easy way to see? So what I'm suggesting is that your description of your flow include which profiles or permission sets you're giving access to that flow. And that will be really helpful later on. And you're going to see why. Now, let's see how now we saw with a profile. What do we do with permission sets? How do we let our users access flows by permission sets? And what you do is create a new permission set, just like any permission set. And I'm going to create one for this particular flow. Sample 1, access flow, sample 1 is what I'm naming it. Now this is new. Look at this. When I go to my permission set to choose what options for the permission set, it's called flow access. And I click edit and I choose which flows now do I want this permission set to give access to. So you could choose one or multiple flows to give permission to on this permission set. Now, I myself am choosing to do it one-off. For each permission set, I want one flow. But you might have a use case where you want multiple flows on one permission set. And that's pretty simple so far. And what we want to do, just like with any permission set, is now manage which users, who is going to get access to this permission set. And just like any other permission set, we're going to choose a user and we're going to click assign. And you can also put these permission sets into a permission set group and do something like that if your use case is necessary. And then now we can see that our user has access to the permission set that I named access flow sample 1. Now, that's just wonderful. This user, test profile user, will be able to run that flow. And ordinarily, before, it really just mattered whether they had flow user, and then they could access any flow. So now we're restricting access by using the override and then choosing a profile. Now, when you look at all your permission sets, you could have hundreds of permission sets. And that becomes somewhat of an issue, especially for me, because you know I built my command center and I want to be able to see just my flows. So what I've decided to do, and what I think would be a good practice, is to create a view of your flows so that you can see just the permission sets having to do with flows, especially if you're going to have multiple flows. Now, this was a little more difficult than I thought because, you know, the permission was flow access, but I couldn't find a setting that would match up to that in order to do it that way, to make my view. And I kind of played around with this for a few minutes, as you can see. And then I did decide that the best way to handle this and to make a view for yourself with your permission set is simply to go back and use from the permission set itself the permission set name. This is again why naming conventions are everything. They really, really do matter. And I'm just going to say, if the name contains the word flow, I want it to show on this permission set list. And now I'm just going to continue on and choose all of the field settings, from the permission set that I want to see in my list view. And of course I need description and just a few other things, whatever you choose here. Let's see, license, that could be useful on permission sets. You might be restricting permission by license. Click save, and then we can see we now have a permission set that shows all of our flow permission sets. And if you put some nice notes in your description, you're really going to have a good idea of what you're doing with your flows, and then it's easier to assign those flow permission sets by separating them out from your other permission sets. Okay, so now we have talked about giving access, and now the question is, what happens when I'm running two flows? When I have a flow and a subflow, and we're giving permissions, what is the behavior with Salesforce? As you can see, I have a test flow A, and on the access for test flow A, I'm giving it to the system administrator and to the test profile. Okay, now let's see, I have a subflow that I've called test flow B, and on this one, see, we're overriding, override. Only the system administrator has access to my flow B. Let's run the flow. I'm logged in as myself, so I'm the admin. And there's my screen for flow A, and there is flow B. That's Misty and I on the community, as always. So we have flow A, subflow B running just wonderfully. This is how you experiment. This is how you really learn how Salesforce works. Get in a dev org, create these simple flows, and really see how they work in action. So now let's look at B on its own, not as a subflow. Let's run B just as flow B on its own and see what happens. And you're going to see the method to the madness. Now it sounds a little silly. And there it is, just B. And remember, do you remember who I gave access to B? Only the administrator has access to flow B. So I'm logged in as another user, my friend Stitch, and Stitch, my user, who is not an administrator, cannot access this flow. And this is kind of ugly. This is what happens here. But we know that this flow, this user does not have access to that flow. Now, remember, what am I testing here? I'm going to go back, logged in as myself, and we have to do this real quick. And I want to switch back to that original flow with the subflow that I showed you. So on test flow A, I have B running as a subflow. We're going to switch back to this and see what happens. And this is a lightning component for a screen flow, if you're wondering. And what we want to test is what happens to B as a subflow. Okay. Now, that's all fine and dandy. It worked beautifully for me. We saw that a minute ago. But now I logged in as my other user who could not access flow B. We are going to run A with B as the subflow, and there's flow B. Now this user does not have access to this flow, but when it's run as a subflow, they do have access. So it goes top to bottom. So this is really important that you understand this and that you're aware of this if you're going to override permissions using the Salesforce functionality now. When you override these permissions, if you use these flows as a subflow, even though they're restricted to one or two user type of permissions or profiles, anyone that has permission to the first flow that runs the subflow gets permission to all the subsequent flows. So that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we need to understand you could really open up yourself to showing data that you shouldn't show, or to running some kind of automation that shouldn't be run. That test profile user now has access to a flow that they didn't have access to because it was run as a subflow. So again, this is something that we just need to be aware of, and you find these things out through testing before you're actually building anything. Now, the other super exciting thing with the new flow features is we just talked about access and how now we can modify access, where before everyone had access who had run user. And now we're talking about what mode of execution. What mode are we running it in, and how can we change that? And sounds so scary, mode of execution, but it's really not. We're talking about user mode versus system mode. So when we're running a workflow rule, a process builder, a flow, or an action, we need to know what mode we're running in. And so if we're doing like a workflow rule, and this is why some people love workflow rules, that's running in system mode. So it doesn't matter who the user is that clicked a button, that made a change to a record that initiated the execution of the automation. Whatever that user has, it doesn't matter. It's going to run like as if it was the admin and access to any data necessary to do the operation. But when you're in user mode, then what your automation is dependent on what permissions that user has with the object and field level and sharing permissions. And this is changing. And first, we want to understand the default behavior before we click on these override settings that Salesforce is giving us now. And they have some documentation, and I made a visual from it, as to what mode our automation is running in when we're talking about flows. And what Salesforce is saying is we're in default mode depending on how you are calling that automation. So if I have a lightning page, as we saw a moment ago, and I have a screen flow, the default is user mode. But if I have a flow that is an auto launch flow, and I'm running it from Process Builder, where I'm scheduling a flow, you see that those two are now in system mode. This is by default. The Salesforce is doing this behind the scenes without you changing a setting. Interestingly, and notice that developers code the mode. It depends on the code. So developers have had this for a long time of being able to switch modes from the default. But we now, as non-coders, can override and switch from user mode to system mode. Let's take a look. I have created, again, a very simple screen flow for demo purposes. And there it is. I'm showing you as a lightning component, the screen flow. And I'm logged in as admin. So this is admin. I have access to these objects to edit these objects. And I just have three simple fields, text fields. And I name them different names because this is for testing. One edit, one read only, one no access. And I just want to show you first how this simple flow works before we start overriding defaults. And what I want to do first is to update these fields. Now, until spring of 2020, this type of flow automatically was running only in user mode. And what user mode meant is it depended which user was on this contact page, which user is using this page, and that would, what they could see and do would depend on that user's permissions. So we have those three fields down in the details, and this is a screen flow. And we're going to make our updates right here in our screen flow. And we're going to see the updates on our details right below instantaneous. Now, I think this is really cool. This is going to be a really great way of us actually allowing our users to input information rather than clicking edit and doing it the old way. So I'm really excited about doing this type of thing in my org, and I'll show you why, especially with the system override. So we've shown you how this works, and now I just want to show you the flow. Really simple. Simple as it gets. Get records, screen, update records. That's all we need. Now, I have named this flow with a naming convention. And it's contact, because I'm on the contact object is where I'm going to run the flow. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to update a record. And what kind of flow is it? A screen flow, SF. And what mode am I in? User mode. So that's the default mode, but I am naming my flow with this name. And you'll see why I do that. And I do think it's best practice for you to get in the habit of naming your flows in a significant way so that you understand what you're actually doing with the flow. Now, this is new. So I want now to switch modes. And how do I do that? You saw it was just the little gear icon. And now Salesforce, if we look at the information they're giving us, they're talking about, by default, how the flow is launched determines whether the flow runs in the context of the user or the system. So if you have existing flows that you built long before this feature was available, you are running in user mode. So Salesforce has already made the choice for us. But, and you're going to see this was created, it already started out in that mode, user or system, depends on how the flow is launched. Now I have two more options I can switch to. System context with sharing or system context without sharing. So we know what system mode is. Now with sharing and without sharing, what we're talking about is the record access. So do you have a private sharing model or a public sharing model? And then depending on which model, do you want people to see records they don't normally have access to? So if you do without sharing, that is saying that record level access is not enforced. If you say with sharing, you're saying that a user that has access to certain accounts can only have access to those certain accounts still. But we are going to give them system context, meaning they have access to an object or to a field, etc., that they wouldn't normally have. I'm going to choose to change this mode to system context without sharing. And all I have to do to make that change is click done. Did you see that? It already switched and it says runs as system. I didn't have to activate, deactivate. I didn't have to do a new version. I didn't have to create a new flow. This is good and bad. I think that if you're not naming things correctly and really knowing what you're doing, if you make a change and you're not aware or a different admin makes a change, you could have problems. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'd like to have two versions of this for testing. So I'm going to create a new flow, and that new flow will be in system mode rather than just leaving this one in user mode. So right now for this one, I want to leave it, I actually want to switch it back so that it matches up to what I named it, and switch this one back to user. And we're going to see that I have two versions of the same flow, one in user, one in system, and we're going to see how that actually works. Okay, so we're logged in as Stitch in this case, and this is my non-admin, and we are in user mode. This is, you see how easy we can tell because my naming convention, user mode, SF user, and that's why this is kind of good for debugging and things like that. And we have a problem here. My user can't run this flow that I just created. It's not letting this user run the flow, and I wonder why. Remember, that flow, we were doing an update to contact. We're on the contact record. It certainly appears that our user does not have edit. There's no edit button, and there are no fields that are editable. So because this user is read-only on contact, that flow will not run for that user because I'm trying to update the contact. Because remember, the screen flow by default is running in user mode. And sure enough, we're looking closer at the profile for this user, and it is read only for this test profile. So that is what user mode does for you. It restricts access so that a user can only have access if their permissions allow it. Okay, so we have this flow and it's running in user mode. Now let's test it. What do you think will happen if we change this flow to the system version of this flow? So I'm going to edit this page and change my Lightning component. Remember, I mentioned that I made two versions of the flow. And this is another reason why the naming convention is important when you're calling the flow somewhere. It's really helpful to see that that is the user version of this flow. If you weren't to name it that way, you might have a harder time choosing the correct flow and really knowing what you're doing. But so I have the word user in my naming convention, and now I'm changing to system. I'm going to run the system version of this flow. And don't forget when you change flows to pass your record ID on once you've changed to a different flow. And let's click save. Now we're going to run the exact same flow in system context and see what the difference is. I clicked a little button straight from my Lightning page, and I can just see it takes me right to my flow. So if I wanted to make changes to the flow here, I could. I don't suggest that, just because you may make a change and not change the name, or you might do something else, but it is good for troubleshooting. All right, so now we are running in system version of the flow, and now our user, who still only has read-only for contact, can run this flow because we're in system context. So this flow is appearing just fine for my user. And let's see now if these are the fields below. You can see in the visibility test the two fields that are still read-only. They're still read-only. But through the screen flow now, I can make updates. Now this to me is a great use case. of using a screen flow in system mode to pages that are read-only for your user, or when your user has read-only on an object, and letting them just change a few fields that you want them to have access to. This is really very, very useful. So let's click next and see if that update happens. And it did. Easy. So even though it's read-only on this object, my user, by overriding into system mode on the screen, could make the change. And that is really an amazing, amazing feature, in my opinion. And of course, we're trying to get back as admin. We have a little problem here. It only takes a second. Okay, let's come back in as admin. And let's just see if our other user, yes, made changes to the read-only, to the edit, and even to a field that's named no access. Now, I named that field no access as a test because what I did in the profile for that user, in addition to, and you're going to see it in a moment here, to having contact as read-only, I've even given them a field that's read-only, but on a field-by-field basis, there is a field in which our test profile has no access whatsoever. So we see there's no create, there's no edit, but the actual field called no access, I've not given any access at all, not even read-only. And yet, through system mode, through overriding our screen flow to system mode, this field that says no access field in system mode, we're able to make an update to that mode. And there we are. So as we can see, it's really easy to change access and override the default behavior of our flows from one mode to another. And there is no real big process. You just switch it and click done. And what I do recommend when you do this is that you make another version, unless you're only going to be running one version at a time. And the other thing that you can take advantage of is user visibility, component visibility, because perhaps on the same page, I want to run a system version for some users and a user version for other users. And this might be a good use case. So you can really control on your Lightning pages what certain users can do with using these flow components. And this, I would suggest you can buy a profile. I can set the visibility so that only this one profile can use this system version of my flow. That would be my suggestion on really refining. And this is the thing, get into a developer org and do this for yourself and really go, I mean, I'm just tipping the iceberg here with these new functionalities. Really go deep and really try everything you think you might want to do and see how it works. Because reading it in the documentation or seeing it, even watching me do this, is not the same as you doing it for yourself. So I really, really hope that this encourages you to get your own dev org and start playing around with the Flow Builder in 2020. I mean, if you're in a developer org, you can't make a mistake. I mean, dig in deep, break it. I love to break things because when I'm breaking things, when things aren't working the way I expect, I'm learning and I know that I'm getting to the best way to innovate and to really master process automation. So keep that beginner's mindset, keep learning and evolving along with the platform. Remember that you don't need to know everything, and having questions is okay, and that the key here is just to spend the time and have the right attitude into staying current with the new releases and the new functionality. So have fun with the experimentation, and that way you can decide for yourself whether you want to refactor right now, whether you want to try out some of these new functionalities in some of your new solutions. And my message to everyone is be well and stay safe. I hope everyone is doing well. And aloha. It's time for questions.
All right, so as a reminder to folks, if you have a question about Monica's presentation or a general process automation question, you can post that out on our Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour. Gregory had posted a question, doesn't system admin have access to all flows even if not included in the perm set?
Yes, probably, but I was just doing that as an example. I haven't tested that 100% because it is overriding, we are overriding Salesforce's normal functionality. So I can't say 100%, but I would assume so, that the admin would have access to all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, let me just check to see if any questions are coming through. Now, as folks are going through and playing around with these new features, as they come up with questions, where do you recommend that they go and ask those questions?
Oh, you mean to me particularly?
Yeah, yeah.
Or you mean in general of asking questions? Because I'm still experimenting myself. So the point is that I don't have all the answers, and I don't think anyone does. So I would say definitely you can post your questions to Twitter or the success community. You can always tweet me and see if, or any of us here. Jen, you're probably the perfect person to answer a lot of these questions. But you know, some of these things you find out by experimenting, and I have many, many, many more hours going forward of things that I want to try and see what happens.
All right, I'm going and refreshing. And see. As a reminder, folks, if you have questions, you can go out and post them to the Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour, or if it's easier here, to just post them out in the questions area. So while we just give it a couple minutes to see if anyone else has any questions, Monica, what would you say is your favorite automation feature?
Oh, you mean tool or feature? So obviously Flow is my number one.
I guess like feature within Flow.
I love screen flows. I have to say that what I do is build mostly, I try to make it so that almost all record input is done through a screen flow so that I can control completely validation along the way and actually guide my users. So I have many screen flows in my org. And now with the system mode of being able to override, I can see so many more use cases. So I would say definitely my favorite thing is screen flows of all of Salesforce automation.
Cool. All right, we have a question from Omar. Would you move same field updates from your process builders to before flows?
I would, and I would like to do that. I haven't gone there yet. But what I've heard is that the speed on those before save is very good. I think on Virtual Dreaming, there was a session done by Dan Appleman on that. And so I am excited by it. I don't know if you can speak on that, Jen.
Yeah, so Salesforce has posted on their Salesforce Architect blog architect guides on automation, and it goes through and highlights when is it appropriate to use before save flows and after save flows with Apex or just Apex. So let me get that link and I'll post it out on Salesforce Automation Hour because I think it's a really great guide. But I would say start considering moving those processes to flows. I would like for it to be able to do a couple more things. I'm talking about after save flows. So I would say go and move your before save flows because it is speedier. And again, it's only on same field updates and not on other objects. All right, last call for questions. Again, it's anything related to Monica's presentation or general process automation questions that you may have. Okay, Omar has another question. One single process versus building a framework.
I'll let you or Rakesh take that one.
I
haven't been able to get single process to work.
Just talking about Process Builder, what I do, I follow the same process as we do with Apex triggers, where it's just one process per object.
Yep, I agree.
Is how I do process builders. Yeah, I have yet to see with the ability to do flows to be able to do the one object, one flow per object. Marco has a question. Do you recommend a naming convention for Process Builder? Is it similar or can you give an example? So how do you name your processes, Monica?
I have, I don't have anything quick to show you, but well, with my automation command center, I had a very elaborate naming convention, and that is on the previous session. I believe I might have a slide of it on my website, notasblank.net. But I think it's important to generally have as much information. I use a numbering convention. The one thing I do different than anyone else probably is I number all my automation. So I have 101, 102, 103, 104, and I have a number so that that's related easily to look up very, very fast if I have an error or a problem that I can find. And that's the one big, I think, difference that I haven't seen a lot of other people using numbers. So I don't have duplicate numbers of my automation. So I go 100, 200, 300, etc. So 101, 102, 103, 104. And then I know what my subflows are compared to my flows. And I put an and in front of it and an and the word sub, sub, that I know I'm going to use it as a subflow. And that way it's very easy to find. The problem you have is when you go to pull your flows or your automation anywhere and you're using them in a button or something, it's very hard to find the one you want. So whatever naming convention works for you best, but my tip would be definitely some kind of numbering.
Okay, last call for questions. Do a refresh of the Trailblazer community. Nope, don't see anything there. Great. I think we're all set for questions, Monica. So
fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you again for coming back to present, and we will look forward to your presentation in November.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're going to talk about refactoring because I think that's something that we're all kind of working towards.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.